So how is it possible for a company to achieve unicorn status in just 5 years? What are the key learnings after building the fastest growing transportation platform in the world? The next keynote speaker will share his vision on the future of urban mobility in a hyper-competitive market. So let's welcome on stage Jevgeni Kabanov, Chief Product Officer at Taxify.
Green button, okay. Good morning, everyone. Very nice to be here in Bucharest. I haven't seen much of the city yet, but I actually didn't pack my winter jacket because I thought I'm flying from Tallinn. I'm flying south. It's definitely going to be warmer. So it's +8 in Tallinn. It's -4 here apparently. So, so the climate change. Probably or something is affecting it. It's interesting if it is a climate change because actually, despite the topic being the future of urban mobility, one thing that I'll talk quite a bit today is the climate change and how it affects us and what can we do. Like specifically in the transportation sector of the economy to change that. So I represent Taxify. Which is an Estonian company, an Estonian startup unicorn, and I serve as the Chief Product Officer, which means that I'm responsible for everything Taxify does. So if you have if you take a ride and you have some trouble, feel free to contact me. In the end, I'm responsible for everything that happens. Just to talk a little bit about Taxify, we've been around for about 5 years, and this year we stand to make around €1 billion of rides in total. We're growing crazy. I don't know if that number is even relevant anymore because every time I look away, the number changes. We're growing easily 20% every month. And it's just this crazy scale and crazy growth, and so far there's no end to it inside. And so this year we entered the Unicorn Club. We raised a round with Daimler and Didi at $1 billion valuation, and we hope that these numbers are going to get a lot bigger in the next few years. So the whole I'm going to talk. The topic is the future of urban mobility. I will talk more about ride-hailing and urban mobility as a whole, much more than Taxify. But obviously Taxify is one of the bigger players in that area. And that's one of the reasons why we know it so well and why we're excited about it. I'll also talk a couple of things about myself, maybe just to help you understand where I'm coming from. And so I also built a startup in Estonia. It was called Zero Turnaround. If you happen to be a Java developer, you probably heard about a product, Jrable. There. So and I've done that for the last 10 years. I was the founder and CEO of that company, and we built it up to 200 people, and we actually sold it last year. And so the reason I'm actually talking about all of that, the main reason is that after I sold the company, I did the classical things. I bought a house, did a round the world trip. Polynesia is amazing, by the way. And after that, I basically, could do whatever. I could work, I could not work, and was kind of thinking what I want to do. And you got to imagine how cool Taxify really is, because I chose to go there as an employee, rather than not work or rather than do something by myself. So it's an incredibly exciting company. It's an incredibly exciting sector, and and that's why I'm psyched to be here and to tell you all about it. Before we talk about the ride-hailing, it's maybe worthwhile to take a look at what the technology sector looks as a whole. And we're at a very interesting place in kind of human history where technology has gotten us to the point where there's no huge barriers to entry. So the top 5 public companies are all non-technology companies, right? And you have to go quite a bit down to find a non-technology company in that list. Not only that, but like technology companies now dominate some sectors which were traditionally not considered to be technology at all. Like Netflix is basically the new TV. You know, Spotify is like dominates the entertainment, like music industry, and you know, and obviously we have the whole ride-hailing, which doesn't seem like a technology thing at all, but turned out to be like very heavily influenced and dominated by these big technology companies. And like, what is the reason for that? Well, before we talk about the market, I'd like to talk to you about the kind of the bigger issue at hand. And when you talk about the urban mobility, then the biggest issue is just how horribly inefficient the way we move people around in the cities is right now. So, you know, in Estonia, we have like about 1 car per 2 inhabitants. In US, it's almost 1 to 1. So in US, there's literally 300 million, you know, plus cars driving around the roads. And if you look at what happens to them, then like 95% of the time, the cars are just standing somewhere. And you don't have to think long to understand that this is not a great way to do things. So we're hunking around a 2-ton piece of metal, you know, mostly for to transport one person from point A to point B. That 2-ton hunk of metal will stand somewhere basically, you know, 16 hours. Well, what is it, like actually 22 hours a day, right? And so that we could ride it for 2 hours a day, we have to create parking spaces for that, right? So like there's, in most cities, there'll be 8 parking spaces for each car because those damn things move around and they still stand most of the time, right? So, so that's, the whole thing just seems like, you know, if we could have designed, if a committee of experts would sit and design a highly inefficient system how to move about in cities, that would probably be it, right? And on top of that, you know, obviously, it's not an amazing thing from the point of view of the environment because you know, but to power those 2-ton hunk of metals, we pump basically carbon from the earth and then burn it and deploy it into the atmosphere. So, you know, we just basically, from the perspective of like the planetary ecosystem, cars are just a mediator for pumping the carbon from the earth to the atmosphere. Not a great idea, as it turns out, right? And like, I love all the controversy about the climate change because when I was like in high school, you know, the greenhouse effect was nicely written in my textbooks, and like it wasn't like controversial because then it wasn't like a big deal. Everybody knew that the greenhouse effect is a real thing. You know, Venus was like brought as an example of like greenhouse effect, like Jupiter, and now suddenly, you know, when there's a real chance that we're having the greenhouse effect, it's suddenly a controversial topic, and there's like, and so it's quite an interesting transformation. But in any case, you know, we don't know exactly how the climate change will affect us, but it generally seems like a bad idea to affect the planetary ecosystem on such a grand scale. So, you know, if we could kind of put less carbon into the atmosphere, that sounds like a good idea. And today, 30% of that is transportation. And obviously, this is something that, for me personally, is a highly motivating reason to get into the urban transportation, to get into the urban mobility, because if we can change that number, you know, if we can reduce it by half, then, you know, this is a considerable amount of effect we'll have on the planet as a whole. And from the people perspective, it's also just a gigantic waste of time. You know, driving a car is pretty boring, and in most cases, in most cities now, the number of those cars means that most of the time you're going to spend it standing in traffic, and which is, you know, considerably more boring than just driving a car. And so we just have those people spending like, so in Europe it's like 38 minutes, but if you look in US, you know, if you look at the Bay Area, the Silicon Valley, people have easily like 1-2 hour commutes there. It's quite terrible actually. And it's the same like in a lot of other places in the world. It's just it's just, again, it's like, you know, we've designed a system which is strained to capacity. Like, it was not meant to accommodate 7 billion people, and it's just getting harder with every day. So so this is our setup. You know, we have a highly inefficient system. It's a polluting system. You know, it's it's something that seems that we could do better, right? But you know, the cool thing about that is that there's a lot of things like that where things are inefficient and they're polluting, but it's just not worth it to do it. But in this case, what's great is that the economical, I would say that the economical and the kind of other interests align, because it's also an absolutely gigantic market. I don't know if my, oh yeah, some of my emojis still made it. So the about 12 to 13% of household spend is actually on the urban transportation, right? So whether on car or on like public transportation, on taxis, or on ride-hailing, that's like altogether. And that is just a massive amount. It's second only to housing. It's actually we spend more on transportation than we spend on food. And so the opportunity, you know, to change that market, the opportunity to create something new in that market is absolutely incredible. If we put it in absolute numbers, it's 11 trillion euros per year, right? So this is an absolutely insane number. So 11 trillion euros per year, this is the size of the market we deal in. Like in my previous company, we had like a, you know, we were talking that we have like a 2-3 billion market, and we're super happy because it was so big market. And I came here and oh yeah, we have like 11 trillion to play with. For comparison, you know, Google and Facebook are essentially, or Google is a good example. It's essentially an advertising company with a search engine strapped on. And it's actually one of the biggest companies in the world, but the market it operates in, the advertising market, it's only a 1 trillion euro market. So it's like more than 10 times smaller than this one. So there's a real opportunity, you know, that there'll be multiple Googles coming out of this, right? It's really a dramatically big market and dramatically interesting opportunity. And so it is an incredibly interesting situation where I do believe that there have been some big changes in the urban mobility, and over the next decade we'll see a lot more massive changes which make it more efficient, less pollutant, make the cities less congested, improve everybody's experience, and makes those companies like a ton of money, including mine. So a lot of stuff to be excited about. But today, if you look at like what's the spread, where those 11 trillion euros are spread, it's like, and this is actually not based by money. This is based on the number of city rides, because in reality, most of the money goes towards personal cars. But today, if you look at the rides in the city, then about 50% is public transport, and another 50 is like personal cars, and a small percentage is taxis on demand and like kind of this ride-hailing. And by the way, this is like a very high level, and this will apply to most of the stuff, because all those things greatly vary from city to city, from local to local, between like different regions. So, you know, don't try to quote me as this is the truth, but this is the averaged out truth. It's enough to have a conversation about it. The thing is that we believe that, and most of the ride-hailing guys believe, is two things will happen over the next 10 years or so. One is that the market for on-demand transport will actually grow 10 times, and the other one is actually public transport and on-demand transport will become like very similar, and the lines will actually start blurring between where the public transport is and where the on-demand transport is. And obviously, we'll take a lot of personal cars off the road, right? So that's something that we believe will happen over 10 years. So why do we believe that happened? So interestingly enough, if you really drill in like what the business that we're in is moving people from point A to point B within a city. And if you drill like what makes that experience, it basically comes down to price and availability. You care how much time it will take you, and specifically how much time it will take you to find something, and then how much time it will take you to get somewhere, and you care how much it will cost, right? And so public transportation is a classical trade-off where it will take you longer, and it goes on some rigid or not so rigid schedule, but it costs less. Personal cars cost more, are very available, but come with their own like strings attached, like parking and things like that. And then on demand is somewhere in between, probably. But if you look what happens over the next 10 years, so availability is kind of down to the particular means you turn, but the price is changing, right? So the change in price is what actually created the whole ride-hailing business and what continues to drive it and to grow it. And again, I have a chart here. Don't take it with a grain of salt, because this will differ greatly depending on where you are and what you do. And it basically, what is the right price? And I take it as 100% because I didn't want to put any absolute numbers here, because like a price of a ride in Paris and a price of a ride in, I don't know, Nairobi are two different things, and also all the different things change because of that. But if we take just a taxi as like the 100%, because this is typically the most expensive way to move around in the city, then ride-hailing is already quite a bit cheaper than taxi. And why is that? It comes to a very basic thing. It's efficiency. In the end, we're the mediators between the taxi drivers and the riders. And the taxi drivers care about making a certain amount of money. They care about making a decent living wage. But they care less about how exactly they make it. And usually taxis will stand like basically 2/3 of the time, 60% of the time, taxi drivers will just stand somewhere waiting for somebody to come to them and take an order. So ride-hailing utilization is typically like 60-70%, and can go even higher. And that obviously, since now if we have utilization which is like 50% more, then we can charge the riders a third less. And basically the taxi drivers still earn the same amount. The interesting effect of that, by charging a third less, we actually more people are willing to take the rides, because now it costs less. Now people, and this actually creates demand, and so now taxi drivers have even more utilization, and then more taxi drivers come, and this is the classical network effect, right? If you heard about it, then ride-hailing is very subject to the network effect, where more demand creates more supply, drives down the prices, creates more demand, creates more supply, and it's a very cool positive feedback loop. And so this is, so ride-hailing reduced the price, actually increased the market somewhat, and there's still a lot of things being done. There's like AI is being deployed, Taxify is right now 12 data scientists working on trying to make this whole thing more efficient, and other companies have more than that, and lots of things still to be able to optimize to increase that utilization and to drive the price down here. On top of that, there's pooling, which is that obviously it's inefficient to drive one person at a time. So can we drive two people or more? And can we pool multiple rides? And so pooling typically is 20-30% of the rides, depending on the city. So not all rides can be pooled, but for that you can decrease price by 20-40% typically as well. So you can decrease ride even further, though it's not it's not going to be as it's not going to affect all the rides, right? So, but it will take again, it's kind of like this trade-off between the time it takes you to get somewhere and price, and the people who will be willing to take that trade-off will be very happy with pooling. And it gets more interesting because, like I said, when you get into pooling, you start blurring the line between the public transport and on-demand transport, because now you can just imagine a bus being like a big instance of the pool, and people just getting on the bus and getting off the bus, and just kind of dynamically hailing, and the bus route changes depending on the traffic in the city and where the demand goes and where does it flow. Does it flow from east to west or west to east, and all this kind of thing. So, and this is all again driving the pooling price down and blurring the lines between public transport and private transport. I'll speak a little bit more about that. Of course, I can't talk about the future of urban mobility. I can't talk about ride-hailing without mentioning the self-driving. So, again, this is just random number put here. Not random, but based on a series of assumptions, let's say, that is put here. So, we have self-driving at some point coming in, maybe, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then also self-driving with pooling, right? So the same thing applies, that with pooling it gets even cheaper because now you can pool rides. So, and if you look, then, ride-hailing is a third cheaper, pooling is half the price of taxi, self-driving drives it further by 2/3 down, and pooling is already somewhere 1/5 of the price, right? So all of them will also dramatically increase demand and a lot more. And this is what in the long term, these are some of the things that in the long term we believe will cause the market to grow dramatically, right? There'll be a lot more on-demand rides than there is private vehicle rides. So I will talk a little bit about self-driving. And this is kind of where it might end up at some point, but I can tell you that absolutely nobody today can tell when that point will happen, and there's multiple reasons for that. What usually is talked about a lot with self-driving is technology and regulation. So technology is, we have enough technology to put something on the street now in some limited conditions with some quite rigid control. And the biggest problem on the technology side with self-driving is I personally at least have still poor understanding what does a 1/10% error rate mean for self-driving. So like classical, when you do this machine learning models, then it's quite easy to get them to like 80%. It's hard to get them to 95%, and from then on it gets like progressively it's basically exponentially harder for every next percent. And we're at the point where we're actually fighting for this last few percents, and unfortunately the problem is that it's quite a hard problem. But let's assume that the technology is going to get solved. I'm not an expert in the area, so I will leave commenting on that to the experts. I assume that the regulatory will also get solved. Actually, there's going to be some hurdles, but it's going to roll out over the next 10 years if the technology is solved. And I think a lot of is talked about the ethical part, like the trolley problem. What if the self-driving car has to choose between like the rider or like 3 people that it can hit or things like that? I actually think that it's not going to be such a huge problem as people think, because first of all, those instances right now arrive, like if you think of the whole planet and all the cars, even there's quite few instances where such choices need to be made, and right now people are making them pretty randomly. So I don't think I don't think the situation will go anyhow worse with the self-driving cars. And second, because self-driving cars today are basically black boxes. We actually, we train the models, but we don't actually necessarily understand how exactly do they behave. So nobody's going to be programming like if there's a choice between a child and an adult, choose an adult. Like nobody. So I don't think the ethical is a big thing on that. What I actually think is not talked enough about is the economical piece of self-driving. And realize and so the economical part of self-driving is quite a whole different thing. So in the end, for self-driving to take over like this on-demand, the economy need to be better than what one can get right now with people. And that's actually quite hard, because not only like the vehicles today with all the hardware are about like 3-4 times more expensive than a typical car. On top of that, they actually need operators. Right now, basically, when Google says that we have nobody in the car, it just means that they figured out how to put the driver remotely outside the car, and he's sitting somewhere and watching everything that happens still in real time. So we still have one-to-one operator between the self-driving car and people, and theoretically, we can, the long-term plan is to get that number down to 1 to 10. But again, it depends on quite a lot of things working out, right? So it's not clear that it can be done. Then obviously, since most likely application for self-driving cars is going to be the shared fleets, somebody has to maintain those. Somebody has to clean them. Somebody has to check them. So they're going to be more like airplanes, from the point that they have some rigid regulation, they go through checks, and you have to like certify them, and because there's a lot of liability. Basically, if one of them hits a human, then that's liability for the company or for the fleet operator. So all of those things are going to be quite expensive, and just it's a big question how the unit economics of that all will work out for ride-hailing, because that's going to be the kind of the biggest place where it can be applied. But also, when will it apply? When will that unit economics be better than just hiring a human? And also in what regions? Because there's like 10x difference in earning power, like between US and Eastern Europe, right? So lots of different questions. I think in the next 10 years, it's more likely that this is going to be a very slow, very gradual rollout than something explosive. But there's something actually which I think will happen in the next few years, which is less talked about, and this is the coming of the electric vehicles, right? And so one of the issues I have is that when we talk about electric vehicles, we talk mostly about like having a personal vehicle, like buying a Tesla or buying a Nissan Leaf, and actually. And also, like all the state incentives today are basically. I don't know if Romania has state incentives for buying an electric vehicle, but they all are aligned with like buying a personal vehicle. But if you think about if you want to make the most difference for the environment, what actually you have to like kind of replace the most miles driven, and so the most miles driven will be in reality the on-demand and the public transport. Like it will be much more efficient to replace those, and you'll get much more of a bang out of it than trying to replace the personal cars, which stand like 95% of the time. Electric cars are naturally also very aligned with how the kind of the on-demand businesses think, because you have like a larger upfront cost, but which is amortized over a lot of time. Then you have actually lower fuel cost, right? Because electricity is almost everywhere significantly cheaper than gasoline. And actually you have a lower maintenance cost because electric cars are just much simpler, right? They don't have gearboxes, they don't have like all the pumps, all the liquids that need to be pumped around, like much less moving parts. So maintenance is cheaper, the cars last longer, and it seems like, you know, so I think actually the more interesting piece even than self-driving, or the more immediate, is like if the price of the cars will just go a little bit down, or the states will realign their incentives, then like almost all ride-hailing companies, like at least will actually go to electric. What's also interesting about that is while self-driving makes more sense in kind of like Western Europe, where the biggest cost is the human, and you know it's replacing human, electric actually makes a lot of sense in the poorer places, where a lot of the cost is the car and the fuel, right? So it's also, this also like there's a lot of people living there. So you know, places like Southeast Asia and Africa and China, like where still the per capita income is lower. I don't know actually if China is lower nowadays, probably not anymore. So there's like a lot of people living there who would very much benefit from electric, and the environment would greatly benefit if it would get there. So this is something that I'm excited about, actually, even more than self-driving, because in the end, self-driving will not affect the environment as much as electric will. Self-driving will in the long term if we really get off the once we start getting off the personal vehicles, if the cost is really driven down enough. So other things that are in the future for this business. One thing again, that when we think about on-demand, we always think about cars. But for example, in Southeast Asia for Grab, most of the rides are on motorcycles, right? Which are again kind of better for environments. We're not lugging around 2 tons of metal, even though there are gasoline engines. But definitely better to drive one person on that than on the usual cars. There's some lighter electric vehicles, right? I talked about like almost every ride-hailing company today is experimenting with this minibus pooling, which blurs the lines between the public transportation and private transportations. You know, Uber and others are experimenting with this flying small like electric drones, which could carry one person at a time. I don't know how much of a moonshot is that. I think battery capacity is still not quite there, but you know, but it could be there in a decade. And the thing that happened last year, which is just incredibly cool, is this the scooters, the electric scooters that got rolled out across the world by companies like Lime and Bird. And so Taxify also started doing electric scooters, and I will tell you about that in a little bit, because it's quite exciting. So a couple words about Taxify. You know, where we are focused is moving people around in city, like I was saying. So this is like ride-hailing. Now we're going into rentals, and you know, and we do want to integrate with public transportation. Like most ride-hailing companies, will also start delivering things at some point or other. I think actually we have a delivery service here in Bucharest, which is pretty cool. You know, and we don't really care about intercity travel or whether goods or people. And the region that we focused on, like so, Taxify is the leader today in Eastern Europe and Africa. So we have about half and half rides in Eastern Europe and Africa, and we also started operations in Paris and hoping to start operations in London. So we also would like to be more of an operator in the Western Europe. And you know, and like what's really interesting about the business is, like before I said, you know, there's no Google of ride-hailing. So Uber used to be the kind of, for some time it seemed like Uber is going to be the biggest company, but now actually Didi is bigger than Uber. If you didn't know, Didi is now, so Didi Kaching, which is the Chinese ride-hailing, or at least originating in China, is now the biggest ride-hailing company. And it also operates like in more cities, I think, at this point than Uber, and does like more than 50% the rides than Uber does. So pretty crazy there. And so, you know, but so it looks like there's going to be strong regional players, and so the goal of Taxify is to be like #1 in Europe and Africa, and we're the only European company, like the only like European company with a unicorn status, which is really vying for that position. And so I promised to tell you about scooters. This is like the last thing that I'll talk about today. And so like scooter is just this quite an incredible thing that happened. So when I came to Taxify, I before heard about them, but I was like, okay, whatever, scooters. Like if you don't know, there's this like small electrical engine in the front wheel and then a battery under, and that's pretty much it. It just drives around at 25 kilometers an hour for like about an hour or 2 hours, as long as the battery lasts. And so when I came to Taxify, I took one to try. That was like the most magical thing that happened to me since the iPhone. Like that's literally the kind of the difference in experience that I had. Like I remember I took the iPhone. I'm like, no, that can't be it. Like this is like the touch screen was just so magical at the point when you came from Nokia. And this was like that. It's just it really feels like magic. It's just this thing which is not like it feels like it's light. It looks like a usual this kick scooter which you push with your leg. But it just drives by. You press a button, it just starts accelerating quite rapidly, And so it just feels completely magical. And so I took it for the weekend. I did all the kind of tested all the use cases, drove like short distances and long distances, and took it into the public transport. And I immediately ordered myself one because that was like the best thing ever. And so today, this is my primary mode of transportation. Like turns out that almost all the trips in the city I can do with that. And what's interesting, then I live actually not in the suburbs, but like on the outskirts of Tallinn. And before I had to do in the morning in the traffic, commute was like 35 minutes, waiting in the traffic, whether with my car or like more often Taxify. But with this thing, I actually get in 20 minutes by taking a scooter to the train station, taking the scooter on the train, driving with the train to the city, and then taking the scooter from the office to home. From the train station to the office. And that was absolutely incredible. And what's really cool about that is, again, that about 50% of trips in the city is under 4 kilometers. Scooters are perfect from about 1 to 4 kilometers, right? So this is like 30% of the trips easily. And we believe that this 20-30% of the trips in cities will be replaced by scooters. And this is why, again, this is, we're talking about the gigantic market. Some part of this 11 trillion is going towards the scooters now. Probably could be as much as, could be less, could be as much as going towards ride-hailing. And but what I love about it is going back to like kind of the environmental concerns and so on. This is a wonderful way to move about the city. This is the electric, it's very low powered. Like even with electric cars, you're still hunking around the 2 tons of metal to lug you around. Okay, now it's powered by battery, and hopefully that battery is powered by something, by the wind and the sun. But when on a scooter, it's like it's like kind of the minimal magical device that can get you from point A to point B, and it's still powered by hopefully by sun and wind. But now like the amount of energy you use is exactly the amount of energy that is taking to get you personally from point A to point B, because scooter weighs like 10 kilos, right? Most of the weight, most of the energy expenditure is you, and so this is like an absolutely. I think this is like a huge thing that will change that market, and that will just help us get towards like a cleaner planet faster, right? And personally, I need to brag a bit about my company. That I saw this whole thing unfurl in front of my eyes when I joined, and Taxify went from the idea that we should do scooters to 2,000 scooters in Paris in 3 months. So that's just an incredible pace for a company which is now close to 1,000 people, and we still move at startup speed, and I'm faster than most startups at that. So that was an incredible thing to observe. And if you're in Paris, you can actually you can open the Taxify app, and like this is how it looks like. You just see scooters around. Interestingly enough, the most commonly like how it works is not that people go through the app, but they just see a scooter on the street. They basically scan the QR code with like the camera. It takes them right to the app, and it unlocks. They press a button to unlock the scooter, and they just start driving. And then they just leave the scooter wherever they want to. Like it's just at the end of the trip, you just put the scooter against the wall, photograph it, and say, "I'm done." Right? And in the night, people will come, collect the scooters, charge them, and then distribute them by the morning again. So this is actually like the whole model is also quite cool. Like if you don't know, then the people who charge the scooters are usually also just people with apps who basically are paid per scooter collected, charged, and deployed. Right? So it's still like kind of a lot of this two-sided market model. So to finish my presentation, this is where we believe the future is. It's not in scooters, it's not in cars, it's kind of like all those technologies converging together. The face of urban mobility truly changing, where where we get you from point A to point B in the most efficient, cheapest, fastest way possible. And by doing that, we'll take cars off the streets, and we'll decrease the carbon footprint of the whole operation. And this is something that I'm incredibly happy about, happy to participate in doing, and invite you to join as well. Thank you.
Questions? Raise your hands because I don't see.
Oh, there's somebody there.
Okay, there is someone right there. It's not working?
Can we turn on the mic?
Is it on? Okay, I can come right now.
By the way, while they're coming.
Okay, it works now. Yeah, thanks for a very inspiring talk. So I was just wondering, I've been seeing scooters around Bucharest also, and I'm a cyclist myself, so it just feels so dangerous on a scooter. They go as fast as I do, but if they want to brake, they basically land on their noses because they're really high up. The weight is, the center of gravity is sort of, really high up. If they want to brake fast, they'll hurt themselves. So I'm just curious why you chose walk, pull, and scooter, not there's no bike there, right? There's no bicycle.
Yeah, so about the safety of scooters, they're about as safe as bicycles are. Like they drive at about the same speed and have about the same properties. So obviously people can get hurt on them as they can get hurt on bicycles, but we don't believe that, that there's much of a difference between the two.
Are there any studies on that? Or?
Sorry?
Are there any studies on that?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of study already. Not like as much data as you would want because the scooters is obviously quite new, but it's just like kind of also intuitively, there's not a lot of difference. They drive at the same speed and kind of in the same places. But definitely safety is a concern. There's all kind of things you can also do for that, like for starters, just requiring helmets. But they're safer than cars, that's for sure.
Other questions?
Thank you.
Anyone else? Raise your hands because I don't see. Okay, I guess they will. Anyone?
Okay, so to wrap up, by the way,
right.
the reason I say join us, we do have an office here in Bucharest, and we're looking for great engineers and great product managers and great data scientists and lots of other cool roles. So if you happen to be one of those things, then come join us and build the future of urban mobility together.
Hi, one more question. Did you work with city authorities to organize and find an optimum way for transportation?
We work with some. I mean, we have a regulation departments which deals with that, and I don't honestly. I'm not responsible for that, so I don't know in detail. Again, I think cities are getting more sophisticated with time in sharing their data and kind of using the data from other sources. So I think definitely that partnership will grow with time. But today, we kind of mostly are ahead of cities usually. We just naturally, as a private company moving in such a competitive market, we need to move very, very quickly, whereas cities tend to take things on a slower pace. But I think that partnership will inevitably increase as the time goes forward.
Jevgeni Kabanov, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, guys.